Welcome to episode 3 of the Isobar. Four chief meteorologists sitting around the bar talking weather. And of course, it's an Isobar in our case. We have Emily from down the road in Chicago. Rich is over in Detroit. And Ian is up in Minneapolis. And of course, yours truly, Rob, right here in Milwaukee. So we have had an interesting couple of weeks since last we chatted. And even though we are all generally geographically not that far apart, kind of had some different experiences. So I want to start up in Minnesota. Where's the heat, Addy, and what happened?
Oh, boy, I'll tell you what. Here's the thing. 3 weeks ago, we had 90s, right? We were into the mid 90s. That, by the way, is a weekend I spent in a curling rink. The warmest temperatures we've had for the world's largest
Wow.
curling pro-am. I am beyond Canadian in my
I was
youth. I
gonna say,
was a
tell me
very
you're a
competitive
Canadian living
curler.
in Minnesota without telling me, right?
Yeah, right. And so, we were mid 90s, and everybody, including most weather folks, go, hot dog. It's here. It's an early summer. If we get the heat without getting too much humidity, we can skate around severe weather season. Well, we had 2 days in the 90s, and then take that and superimpose it last week, where we had high temperatures in the upper 50s and low 60s, inordinate amounts of rain. We're inches above now, and I say that because Minnesota obviously is such a big area. Depending on where you look up toward the Arrowhead, we still have some drought areas, but we have been inordinately wet. And yesterday was all about tornadoes. We had 14 reported tornadoes, so we haven't skated around severe weather season, and we have yet to find our way to any prolonged heat wave, if you will. And we even not even talking heat wave, just I'd like to string together 3 or 4 days in the mid 80s.
Above average temps. Yeah, and you're
Yeah.
right. That little tease, that little taste makes it even worse because you know what it's supposed to feel like or what you want it to feel like, and then
Right.
it doesn't. Here, obviously in Milwaukee and down the road in Chicago, we've got that big old lake to live next to. So I've had some happy campers and some very unhappy campers in the last couple of weeks. Lakeside just won't heat up. That lake water is still in the 50s at best. And of course, we've had some below average days, one after the next here. But yeah, hopefully we'll get some heat going. Now, you talked a bit about severe, but we got a Rich, and apparently you've been really starving for severe
I,
weather. Not that we're complaining.
I hate to jinx it. I do because Ian, I sent out an email to you guys a few days ago, and we've been unusually quiet here in Southeast Michigan. Now tomorrow we could get some action. That's certainly a possibility. But 4 weeks ago we had a night of tornado warnings. That was 4 Thursdays ago. And since then, we've had very quiet weather and we need some rain. It's been dry here, certainly a lack of storms, but I think we're going to get into a more active pattern over the next 3 or 4 days.
There you go. That active pattern is, of course, due, right? We're in that weather season. We're in the severe weather season. It's going to kick in. But it is always surprising when we hit these dry spells and it gets you into a false sense of security.
Big time. We're down about 20%. So rain and melted snow since January 1, we should be up near 15 and a half, and we're only at 12 and a half. So, we could use some rain. The drought monitor is not all that bad, except up in the Saginaw River Valley, which is north of Detroit. So down here, moisture soil wise, we're okay, but people are waiting for help with the grass and the flowers and their sod and all that good stuff, spring stuff.
Yeah, meanwhile, some parts of the country way too much water, and we'll circle back to that in a bit. But first, we got down the road, and this is something we've all dealt with. But Emily, when we were talking earlier, you wanted to really dig into this wildfire smoke. The Canada wildfires have been giving us these day after day after day of hazy skies, but some of the worst air quality on record in Chicago.
That and in the world for a couple days earlier in
Yeah.
the month. So that's really surprising, right? Because you have your typical areas that typically have some of the worst air quality in the world on any given day. And Chicago was right up there with some of those cities. So it was a really big talk of the town. And for a lot of people just wondering what exactly are we breathing in? So I actually spent quite a bit of time talking to different experts and doctors. And we talked to this one doctor from the University of Utah named Dr. Perry. He's known as Dr. Dust. So he studied dust and smoke particles and things like that. And I learned so much from him. And it was really fun to be able to share that with the viewers on just how long the smoke particles can actually stay in the atmosphere. So our bodies, they're designed to filter out dust and larger particles, right? But the reason that everybody's so concerned about smoke is because those are really fine particles that can bypass our systems that, are kind of built in for us, our nose hairs, the mucus, lining our nose and our throats and things like that, to try and catch stuff before it reaches our lungs. But with smoke, that doesn't happen. So then it can go into your bloodstream. So that really was a huge talker around the Chicagoland area, especially on those days that we were seeing really unhealthy air quality, and we had airway, lung irritation. Numbers across hospitals were going up for people going in. So a lot of people were really impacted by this. And I just want to share too with some of our viewers here on Fox Local that the smoke particles that a lot of us were all breathing in, they're actually less than 1/30th the size of a human hair. So that's how small they are. And that's why that they can just like get right into your bloodstream. And that's the main concern. But fortunately, over the last about week or so, we've still had some haze, but it has not been anywhere close to what we were dealing with earlier in the month. So we've been noticing some improvements. But I think more than anything, it was a really big teaching moment for myself. I learned a lot, but I think a lot of people, the public, learned a lot about not only dust because of the dust storm that we had, but smoke particles and what we can do to stay safe. And, it's simple things like stay indoors, close your windows, use AC if you have it, because your air conditioning units have filters.
Get back to the
Wow.
K95 masks and things, right?
Right.
That's pretty fascinating. Now, I'm curious to find out. Obviously, Chicago, you have your own pollutants. It's a big city, so there's their air quality plus, of course, the smoke. But here in Milwaukee, not quite the same urban sprawl. So, the smoke was interesting in that it took us from relatively good quality air one day to, dangerous for human health the next. Do you think big cities like Detroit, Minneapolis, Chicago, you think you guys are a little more used to poor air quality days?
I would say that I think that we're more used to it, but I think it was just so much more noticeable, right? And it seemed like it really just hung around. And we have a lot of coworkers that live in the suburbs, and even just their accounts driving into the city, that Chicago itself, it visibly looked so much worse. It
Mm.
felt so much worse because we were holding on to a little bit more of that pollution overhead than even what we were in the suburbs. So I
Did,
think, oh, go ahead,
I was
Rich.
going to say, I'm like, did you smell it? Or Rob, Ian, did you smell it over these
Oh,
last
yeah.
10 days?
Oh, it was acrid. It was, yeah, I
Huh.
equated it, and the Minnesota Pollution Control Authority, they took my tweet and also pushed it out. It would be like around here, it was like going on a camping trip and you had a marvelous bonfire, but it started to rain and the bonfire never went out. And the rain held all of that smoke just in
Huh.
your campsite. You tasted it, you smelt it, you felt it in your eyes. It was acrid, especially around here. And to answer Rob's question, it's not something we expect here other than wildfire smoke. I mean, this is Minnesota. It's the land of clear blue waters, to quote the Hams ad from all those years ago.
There you go. What about Detroit, Rich?
Well, we had it. I never did smell it. I had some reports of people who I trust who said they did smell it, but I felt it in my eyes for about 3 days. I mean, my eyes had this general burning sensation. I cut my own grass, I do my own flowers, I do all that stuff. So I'm outside. In fact, this morning I was outside cutting grass and clipping, but for 3 or 4 days, it was in my eyes, big time, big time.
I didn't see that being a big problem, especially allergy sufferers. I don't really have a ton of seasonal allergies, but this year the tree pollen is off the charts. And then you add in wildfire smoke as another trigger for folks with, underlying issues. And it's been a pretty challenging few weeks.
Can I tell you one thing?
Hmm.
For years, I've taken some kind of an allergy medication. I mean, awful allergies. And this year, I had a conglomeration of viewers email me and say, stop complaining about your allergies, find a local honey producer and eat their honey every day. And I'm like, oh, come on. I'm telling you, as I sit here and I live and breathe, I have not taken one allergy medication this year, and I am footloose and fancy free. I am here to tell you local honey works. I don't know how,
Wow.
I don't know why,
Wow.
but it's
Yeah.
amazing. It has to be locally produced honey.
I guess they're like a tiny dose of the local pollens, you're putting into your system.
I don't know if it works for everybody, but for local honey producers here in Minnesota, I've pretty much eaten it all. And by the way, it's delicious, so why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty easy medicine to take. And for the record, we're not sponsored by local honey, but I will add yet. I mean, who knows, right?
Yet.
If it works for the rest of us, we'll have to look into that. All right, let's shift again because I talked about this. You were saying, that you've gotten some rain and we've also had some dry stretches and the severe weather, maybe not quite kicking in yet, touch wood, over in Michigan. Meanwhile, our friends down in West Virginia, these flash floods, I mean, that's an
Unbelievable.
historic situation.
Yeah. The video and the pictures coming out, I think, I don't want to speak for everybody, but when you see those pictures, you're like, wait, hold on, where is this? And I think up to this point we're 6 fatalities. Is that still holding?
I
Yeah,
believe,
I think they're still missing, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
yeah,
what
I
was that,
believe
Emily?
that's right as of this morning.
Yeah. Which is fascinating, in that it's just such the power of floodwaters. And I find it, it's difficult to communicate with the audience because with flash flooding, you can't rely on the old turnaround, don't drown. Like, we don't want anybody ever hurt, injured. You don't want property damage from flooding ever. But there's something to be said about, if you drove into the floodwater and you lost your car, I feel bad for you, but you had control. With the way that flash flooding occurred, there were folks that literally had no time to make any
Mhm.
decision.
You know,
Well,
it's
and I
funny. I was talking to my daughter this morning. 20 years ago, I was on the air in Iowa, and we had one day where I was on the 12 and a half straight hours, 26 tornadoes. EF3 missed my house by 3 miles. And she said, oh, yeah, Dad, that's crazy. How long you were on the air? We were talking about how long I was on the air yesterday for about 4.5 hours. And I said, yeah, but, tornadoes aren't the big one here in terms of how fatalities really come along. It's flooding. And there was just silence. And we had to get into a big discussion about how serious flooding is, and to your point, Rob, a flash flood. It's called flash flood for a reason.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's something that I was going to mention, locally here around the Chicagoland area, we are so flat that I think when a lot of viewers see flash flooding, like what we're seeing out of West Virginia, they don't really understand, like, how do you get all of that water in one spot? And of course, like
Mhm.
in the back of your mind, you're thinking, yeah, it's hilly, it's mountainous. But like, I think a lot of people that are used to just flat land don't really understand how 2, 3, 4, 5 inches of rain can do damage like what we're seeing in a mountainous region.
I try and use the analogy of an avalanche because I think people think of an avalanche like something that happens very quickly and is very destructive. You start channeling, like you said, Emily, 3, 4, 5 inches of rain through some kind of hilly terrain. It basically is an avalanche of water.
Right.
I got a book for you. So over the years, I'm being from Pittsburgh, the Johnstown flood. Mm, that's one of the greatest floods in the United States, 1889. I think the death toll is 2,200 people. So David McCullough wrote a gut-wrenching book about the Johnstown flood. I don't have the title in my head, but it's David McCullough, award-winning author. Consider that to read about these flash flooding events. And, being from Pittsburgh with all the terrain, nothing like they have out west, but doesn't take a lot of terrain to get water channeling in one direction, and certainly Western Pennsylvania, it's happened over the years. But Emily, like you in Chicago, Detroit's pretty flat, so we have very few instances of bona fide flash flooding in Southeast Michigan. There has been some. Vassar, Michigan, up in the thumb, 1986. There were fatalities there from bona fide flash flooding, but it's pretty rare in this part of the country.
You know what I love every time, Rich, when you talk about some part of Michigan, every part of Michigan has a nickname. You're like, well, up in the pinky, in the thumb, down near the elbow, everywhere in Michigan has some sort of a nickname.
Very true. Many parts to Michigan, but in southern Michigan, everybody knows the thumb of Michigan.
Does look like a big mitten over there, although some Wisconsinites will argue that we look like the mitten, but I don't know. Maybe we're just a pair of mittens right around the Great Lakes. So sticking with the flooding theme, obviously you said, flash flooding, and obviously we have river flooding here. And one of the biggest problems with tropical systems is, of course, the flooding. It not only hits as that storm surge happens, but with the heavy rain, and it can be days, weeks, and months of damage down the road, spreading of disease and infections and things like that. And we are now, of course, into the tropical weather season for both the Pacific and the Atlantic. And we're off to an interesting start. The Pacific seems to be stealing the stage at the moment.
Yeah, really stealing the show. So we're already on our fifth named storm now for the Eastern Pacific. And I think the first named storm was at the very beginning of June. So we're just cranking them out in the Eastern Pacific. We've had Alvin, we've had Barbara, we've had Cosme, we've had Delilah, and now we're on to Eric, which could be the very first storm of the 2025 season to actually make landfall later this week in southern Mexico. So it's been very busy, but as many of you know and can probably speak on, in the Atlantic, it's been quiet as can be, which isn't entirely unusual. Because usually it's hard to get things going in June. The waters are still warming up. We've got the Saharan dust that's in the air, and that acts to limit it a little bit in the Atlantic. But yeah, the Eastern Pacific, she's cranking them out.
How about Emily just
Fascinating
cranking out
start.
all five of those names right off the top of her
Yeah.
head? Just boom, 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 boom. And I think
That's
it's, there's a bit of a interaction too when you're on the air, because you say the word hurricane and you talk about one of the names, Barbara, for example, and then you zoom down like we do with our weather computers, and instead of zooming down to the Gulf, we head over into the Pacific. And I think folks at home are going, hold on, wait a minute. No, that's not where the hurricanes go.
That's right. Yeah, I think the Pacific season doesn't get quite as much focus in many years, partly because, it hasn't been as active as far as impacting, human health and life here in the United States. And also because the path tends to take them away from land. But this year it's off to such a running start. And like you said, Emily, the most recent system here looks like it might be on track to impact Texas in the days ahead. And what concern here is that we get, again, kind of back to what we were talking about with severe weather, we get into a false sense of security, and then we get toward the mid to late parts of the Atlantic season, and all of a sudden we're telling people, no, we're still going strong, and here we go, right?
That's
Yeah.
right. So the peak of the Atlantic season, it really isn't until September. So we're just getting rocking and rolling over the next couple of months. You'll get a couple systems here or there, but typically your much stronger systems, your stronger hurricanes really are coming later in the season.
It is, and I think with all of our markets, when you talk about Detroit and Minneapolis and Chicago and Milwaukee, a lot of snowbirds. And the further west you go, you get people who go down to Arizona and California. But here, I'm not quite sure, and I don't want to speak for everyone else's market, but here it is all about people going to Florida. And people that start really honing in on those forecasts. What about my property? My daughter, the same when I was talking about the flooding, she goes to the University of Tampa. And the first 3 days of her college career, we checked her in, put her in the dorm room, and they closed campus for a hurricane. And I can tell you what to do with tornadoes and where to go, but all of a sudden we're in a hurricane floodplain. There's a lot that happens very fast, and it's hard for us sometimes to make sure that our viewers know that this is an area inundated by winds and storm surge and floods and the type of damage that can linger for years and years and years. And we're sitting up here and generally in the winter going, 3 to 6 inches tomorrow.
Right.
Last year, I was talking to most of our friend Paul Delgado, who's at Fox 13 in Tampa, and they were just starting to get into their big hurricane coverage. And he said something to me that sticks with me to this day. He said, when I left my house this morning and I closed the door, I wasn't sure if I'd be coming back to my house. And I'm not sure any of us here in the north, look, we have the tornadoes, we have the big time winter storms, but I don't think any of us have ever closed the door and thought, I wonder if my house is going to be here when I come back.
That's a very good point. I think you make a good point about snowbirds too. Like so many people in all of our markets here have those homes in the South, and college students that'll be going back there likely in September. So it will be something that we continue to watch with these tropical systems and what could potentially be another record-setting year for the tropics, both as it looks like anyway, Atlantic and Pacific seasons. Speaking of college kids and younger kids, we try to end these chats on a more light note. And I wanted to talk a little bit about kids and the weather. Love working with kids, even though that's the old Hollywood adage, right? Never work with animals and kids. But I love it. Every other Friday here on our show, we have what we call the future forecaster. Kid from 6 to 12 comes in, talks about the weather. I love it. They're passionate, they're fun, they're goofy, they're uninhibited, which is wonderful. But I also wanted to talk about it from the perspective of that's the next generation, right? We're communicating to this next generation and trying to give them some knowledge as they come up. And what I'm finding is that sometimes I can educate the parents through the kids. So I wanted to kind of see what you guys have as an experience talking to kids about the weather. Maybe we'll just start with Emily and we'll go around the horn.
Well, I mean, going to schools, that's my favorite thing, especially elementary kids, because they're just so excited to learn new things. So I love engaging with younger children, but I do want to mention, so my daughter, she's only 5. And the amount of interest that this girl has in weather, it makes you realize that, like, if you expose children to science and knowledge, and I mean, she's not scared of tornadoes, she's not scared of thunderstorms because she understands in a kid version way what's happening around her. So I really, when I go into schools, I try to just break things down in a very simple scientific way. That way kids aren't scared of, the weather. They need to respect it and you need to know what's coming your way. But I love working with kids and just seeing them light up when they know something new and they get to run home and tell their families about it. But it's just fun. You're right. Like kids, they really get involved if they have that knowledge at their fingertips, and we're a big part of that and sharing that with them.
Yeah, for sure. Knowledge is power. And you're right. I think the more they know, the less scared they'll become. Rich, can you give me some kid-oriented weather stuff?
Well, like all of us, and Emily, you mentioned it. I mean, we go to our fair share of schools, and thankfully, school is out because my neighbors across the street, their daughters, who are little, my daughters are now 25, so they're not little anymore. They're out in the world doing their thing. But across the street from me are young kids. But the thing I stress is something that gets talked about, but is perhaps the great danger here in Michigan. It's the lightning. So back when I lived in central New York, I actually met a gentleman who had been struck by lightning twice.
Wow.
Yeah, a real person. And he lived on a farm on top of a great big hill. So when these storms would come, I met him and I interviewed him years ago, but I remember the stories he told. He was shaving with an electric razor back in the day, and it was plugged in and lightning struck nearby and the electricity came into his face and he actually had hearing loss for a short time. And then another time he was in the milk barn and he was actually engaging with the animals, milking the cows. And at that moment in time, lightning struck the barn, stainless steel milk pipe, and the lightning went into him. So I tell the kids all the time about, the unpredictability of lightning. If the kids are outside, they're on their bikes, they're in the swimming pools. But, when it's time to get inside, when you see the lightning or hear the thunder, just go have some ice cream, wait it out, and then resume an hour later. So for me, lightning is a big topic of choice.
And the kids love it. They love all that stuff. And you're right. When thunder roars, go indoors.
Yeah.
Ian, what's your kid tales here?
We started something years ago at the Science Museum in Minnesota called Girls in Science. Girls being underserved in the science category, undergraduated with science degrees. And we started with a couple of card tables, a couple of small hands-on experiences, and we had 2 Girl Scout troops. And 10 years later, we had 10 1,000 Girl Scouts.
Wow.
And it
Wow.
was just the most amazing. My girls basically grew up at Girls in Science, and every hour on the hour, I did a 50-minute show in the big 300-person theater, and we did weather experiments. We made oobleck, we created smoke rings, we created tornadoes, we did all this great stuff just to wow kids with science. And I think is that, you know, that little rope that you can pull them a little bit closer. But when it comes to storms, and I like that whole thing about lightning, we have a promo that runs, and you know, because kids get so and rightfully so, they get nervous about storms because they might not quite understand the thunder and tornadoes, and they see on the news or on their phone that tornadoes can kill people. We created a promo where the youngest child in the house becomes the storm captain, and they have a clipboard with what to do. They get a hat, they get a whistle, and by taking charge of the house, you kind of in a way start to take charge of the storm. And it's been really, really huge. And
Wow.
you know, the youngest kid can have the whistle, and okay, everyone, we're supposed to be in the basement. Who's got the food? Who's got this? And it works well. And for me, it's all about helping children understand the science, but also overcome the fear. So somewhere in there is my story for the day. But the storm captain works
Oh,
really
I
good.
love that.
I'll send you all a copy of the promo. I
Yeah,
think it
we
would
need
work
that.
well everywhere.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
we can maybe put a link up in our show notes today, and we'll put a link in the show notes for Rich's book mention as well, so folks can follow up on that. Yeah, I do something very similar. I end every one of my school talks by empowering the kids to go home and ask their parents or their grandma, or whoever's in charge at home, what the storm plan is. Where's our safe spot? And if they don't know, I'd give them all the information to share it. And then hopefully by the time they've had that conversation, everybody knows. But I might just have to borrow the storm captain idea. I love the clipboard, maybe get a little badge going. Those are fantastic ideas. And I will end with one kind of funny note, because we've been doing our future forecaster for about 15 years now, a little gap in there, unfortunately, for the pandemic. But we're at the point now where I keep having grown adults approach me and tell me they were a future forecaster. And one of my favorites, I was watching my son play hockey, and this grown man comes up behind me and says, "Mr. Haswell." I'm like, "What did I do wrong?" And I was a future forecaster. I'm like, "No way. I'm shipping out for the National Guard tomorrow." I'm like, "Well, thank you for your service." And it was just a full circle moment where, you know, it was 20 minutes. Our KidCaster program is maybe 20 minutes of airtime all put together, but that 20 minutes stuck with this kid who's now off to do some impressive things. And I really think that's one of the joys of our job, is to connect with that next generation. So thank you guys for all you do. Thank you for joining me here for another episode of the Isobar. We'll meet back here again in a couple of weeks, and I'm sure we'll have even more stories to tell.
Can't wait. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic rest of your week, everybody.
Outstanding. Thank you, Rob. Emily,
All
Ian,
right.
tough
Thank
job.
you. See you guys.